Hey, it's Greg Otten here with MaritimeGardening.com, and I got a little bit of time here before the sun sets after a long day out in the garden, just trying to get some stuff done here. And it dawned on me that there's something going on here where I planted my cucumbers and my zucchini that I thought was worth sharing with you. You have to excuse me with my hands. I mean, I talk with my hands anyway, but of course the black flies are out as usual. So what I want to talk about was about slugs and managing slugs and how you should plant things as well. So in each of these domes, and I'm going to flip them off and show you, and somehow these survived the frost. I mean, I got all kinds of things. We've had a ridiculous frost situation here in early July, cold, incredible cold system coming through here, having multiple nights of frost, but not just like a little bit of frost, but like freezes where my hose was so cold I couldn't operate in the morning, and I lost a lot of things, and the garden's been really set back. But somehow miraculously these survived, and in the midst of all that cold and all that frost and all that freezing, the slugs never lost a beat. They were at everything. Somehow under these plastic domes, the slug seemed to love the situation. So I planted cucumbers here and zucchini here, and normally when I plant 2 or 3 per mound, and as they grow you sort of choose the one that's the best. But in my situation here, I'm going to need all of them because I had slugs and snails show up and just take them out. And that's what I wanted to talk about. A lot of people will say, oh, just pick them off, make a slug trap, make a beer trap, put some cardboard down and they'll hide underneath it during the day and you can flip that over and squish them and all that sort of stuff. And that's all great. But I honestly think, and I'm not trying to run anybody down that does that, but anyone that does that, either they're out in their garden all the time. I've got a 9-to-5 job, so I'm not out in my garden all the time. Or they really don't have a serious slug problem. I can have slugs take out a whole row of stuff in one night. And I'm going to flip these up and show you. You got to remember, every one of these spaces where I planted something, I planted 2 or 3 seeds, and hardly any of them have 2 or 3 squash growing. And all of that damage happened in a matter of a couple nights. I had, the seedlings sort of popped up out of the ground, they opened up, and then I checked them the next day and half of them were gone. Just like that. There's no way I could have, through picking slugs or picking snails, managed that situation, because it was happening when I was in bed. You can't be out here all night waiting, listening for slugs to show up. So I mean, I put some slug bait down, and I have a sponsor, Safers. They provide this to me for free, but you can trust me, they didn't give me enough money to buy my integrity. It's just a small amount of money they gave me to offset the cost of providing the podcast that I have. I have a podcast website, and it costs money to have that up, and they gave me a small amount of money to offset the cost of providing that content to my listeners. So, but nonetheless, and I've been using this kind of slug bait for a number of years, ever since I started having slug problems, which is around 2015. I never used anything before 2015, and ever since then I've had slugs. Now I've noticed more and more birds in my garden, and I think they're starting to realize that the local birds and the migratory birds that come through. And my garden's large enough that they could see it from miles away. It's a feature you can you can see it from Google Earth, sort of thing. So I'm noticing more and more birds in my garden every year, and I think they're attracted to the slugs and snails. And my hope is that over time they can just balance each other out, and the birds will come here and they'll eat the slugs and snails, and then they'll keep that population in check, and I won't need anything. But ever since then, I've needed a product like this. So this is Safer's. It's called Slug and Snail Killer, and the active ingredient is ferric sodium. So it's like iron, ferric means iron, iron and sodium. So, you know, when that breaks down into your soil, it just leaves some iron in the soil, and it's not such a big deal. It's a relatively benign product. There's different kinds of products they can use that are on a, you know, a scale of poisonousness. This is benign, in my opinion. As a gardener, I'm totally comfortable with this, and I only use it for a short amount of time anyway. I mean, once you're, I'm talking about squashes here, things like cucumbers and pumpkins and zucchini. When the first leaves come out, they're extremely vulnerable to slugs, and a slug can make them disappear in one night, eat them right down to the ground. But once the second set of leaves comes out and the third set of leaves come out, they get all spiny, and the slugs want nothing to do with them. So it's only a matter of about 2 weeks where you need to protect them from slugs. And I find just putting, about this much down around the base of one of those is really all, around the base of a stem is all you need. Because the smell of this to them is preferable to the squash or the cucumber or whatever you're growing. They prefer it. So they're gonna come from wherever they're hiding once the sun goes down, right? And especially under a plastic like this, the birds can't eat them, right? They're sort of protected from birds. So if they're there, it's an ideal situation. So once it gets dark and dewy, they're gonna come out and they're gonna go towards your plant because they were there yesterday, or that's, they're drawn to it somehow, and they're gonna come across that bait and they're gonna eat that bait, and then they're gonna stop eating immediately and they're gonna just crawl off somewhere and die. And problem solved, and you're not going to wipe them all out. I mean, an area like this, 2,500 square feet, there's no way you're going to remove all the slugs. There's probably thousands of slugs here, and snails. But at least you're going to, knock back the ones that are at your plants. And that's all I want to do. Just leave my plants alone until they're tough enough to hold their own against you. And then, of course, the slugs and snails, they can go about their business. And hopefully there's all kinds of things coming down into the sky, and there's snakes and toads and birds and different things eating them. Moles love to eat those sorts of things. And the system over time hopefully just gets to a balance where it manages itself. Anyway, let me pop these up and show you. I just want to show you, I've done some replanting, but the new seeds I put in haven't come up yet. Because I was worried about frost damage and stuff like that. For some reason these escape the frost damage, but let me just show you how much I lost as a result of slugs. And I'm telling you, like, they were here one day and I came back the next morning and they were gone, just like that, from slugs overnight. There's no way I could have handled that situation by just picking them or putting out some little trap that captures some tiny proportion of them when the rest of them are going for your plants. So let's have a look here. Alright, let's start with the cucumbers. So they're not big yet or anything like that, but if I zoom in here, you can see that there's 2 in this hole. Let me go over here, and there's only 1 there. And there was 2. Some of these had 2, some of them had 3. There's only 1 there, right? The other one got eaten down to the stem. Let's zoom back out. There's another place where I planted, and there's nothing there. They're all gone. I'm going to zoom over here. Let me just zoom back out so I'm not making this up. There's another spot where I planted 2, and there's only 1. Right? That happened overnight. And if you go through the whole garden, you keep seeing the same thing. There's a spot over here. I got 1. Over here, I got 1. Each of those spots there was 2, and now there's only 1, and so on and so forth, right? So always plant at least 2, because you never know what's... Number one, you don't know if, you're not 100% guaranteed that you're going to get germination. But also, you don't know if something's going to come along and just bite it down to the ground. So that's my cucumbers. Planted those about 2 weeks ago, I think. And it's amazing they survived through these crazy conditions. My tomatoes were under a plastic dome like this, and they were completely wiped out. Now this particular garden, it fits the dome perfectly, and it was pretty tight seal with all this hay, so I think that's what saved it. The tomatoes, the garden was made of logs, and it wasn't quite as tight a fit. So I think it was a little draftier, just got a little bit too cold. Maybe, I mean, sometimes these things surviving is only a matter of a couple degrees getting a little bit too cold. The foliage, certain plants of foliage can just only handle so cold, and it just gives up. Anyway, that's the cucumbers. Now let's look over here. This is the garden, and these gardens were covered in domes and covered in hay all spring, and all I did when I went to plant these was move the hay back and put the seeds in. And you're going to say, yeah, the hay caused the slugs. Yeah, it did, because slugs love that sort of environment. But I would say the benefit of having a heavy mulch like this outweighs the cost. I mean, if all I got to do is put a teaspoon of slug bait down for a week once until the plants are big enough and tough enough to handle, you know, to ward the slugs off. The fact that I don't have to water these, once these plastic domes are off, I probably won't water them the rest of the season. They'll take care of themselves. So that's worth it to me. I know there's people that might disagree, but I've been doing this for a while, and I've done it the other way. I can't stand being out here with a hose in the morning. This time of year, you know, it's early. It's still it's kind of spring-like, I guess, because it's just been so ridiculously cold. I mean, I was out here this morning with a wool hat on over my head, just watering a few things in the garden. I can't stand watering my plants, and I just love when things get big enough that I can wrap that mulch around the stems, and I'm just done watering for the season. I enjoy that, and I just come out here to gather food, basically. So I think the benefits far outweigh the costs. And in fact, slugs and snails, they're actually beneficial to your soil in many ways. I mean, they eat a lot of rotting stuff, and they, kind of like worms, they create a lot of nutrients for your soil. But unfortunately, sometimes if they see a nice green leafy thing that they like, they'll turn their attention towards that. Anyway, I'm getting a little bit wordy here. Let's look at these zucchini. Much bigger in size, but again, each hole I planted 2. There's only 1 there. You can see a couple little holes, but that one's doing okay. It's sent up its second leaf. And we look over here, and there's nothing. All wiped out. And then look over here. There's 1 where there had been 2. And over here, there's you can't see, but there's actually 2 growing there. So I'm probably gonna, you know, I think maybe even tonight or the next day, we're gonna get a bit of rain the next few days. I'm gonna let them mature a little bit more, but we're gonna get a little bit of rain over the next 3 or 4 days, so that's a good time to move them. So I'll take some of these and move them to the places where there's nothing. Look over a little further here. Let me just move you in a bit closer, just so you know I'm not making this up, right? There's another hole there. I'm going to hold this in a weird sort of way, but there was 2 there, and now they're gone. Now, and I put my slug bait down, I don't know, 4 or 5 days ago, right? As soon as I noticed it, it just came out one morning and a whole bunch of plants were missing, and I put the slug bait down right away. And you know, it takes a while for the slug bait to go away, and as long as it's around, they'll go for that over your plants. They just prefer, I mean, it's designed that way, right? There's 2, no, there's 1 growing there. Over this hole, they're both wiped out. Over that hole there, there's 1. I don't know if you can see it. There's 1 growing there. And way out there, that hole has nothing, and that hole has, one over there has 2 plants, right? So in every one of these holes I planted 2 or 3, and in most of them I've got 1, and in some of them I've got 2, and in some of them I've got none. So I would say at least, you know, half the squash I planted in this area got wiped out by slugs, and that all happened in about 1 night. And then I came around with the slug bait. So I'm just going to show you about how much I put that down. And this isn't, I don't get any more money from this company if you buy 1,000 gallons or none. You can use whatever you want, and I'm just trying to. The main thing is you should always plant more than 1 seed, of course, 2 or 3, because you don't know how much damage you're going to get. And if you don't know, you don't have a good solution for slugs that works where you are, and you've got a serious slug problem, I would recommend just going with a relatively benign slug bait like this. So just zoom in a little bit more here. There we go. Now, there's still some slug bait here, so this right here, I really don't need to put any down, but this is a piece that's been there for a while. Kind of looks like a mouse turd, really. Not much different. But nevertheless, that's still attractive to a slug. A slug would prefer that to the squash. But just for demonstration purposes. So I can tell what they look like. There's still some of that stuff around. They're like little cylindrical plugs, right? But you know, you're just putting a little bit around the base of your plant like that, almost like a wall, right? For me, that's all you need to protect that plant until it's big enough and tough enough to handle itself. So one of these, one of these will last you quite some time. And I only have slug problems on beans, kale, and squash. I think that's it. Just about everything else in my garden seems to really not have a slug problem. The preference seems to be for baby squash, baby beans. Even when the beans are mature, when they're big, the slugs leave them alone. Is when they're really young. So I'll just show you over here. I had these. I sowed these before we had all that crazy. I meant to keep this video about squash, but these things just tend to evolve. Anyway, here's a garden with some beans, and I sowed these before we had all that frost. And while we were having the frost, the seeds were actually underneath the mulch and under plastic. There's it's just a piece of plastic I put over there and weighed it down with rocks. And they just stayed underneath the mulch and underneath the plastic the whole time. And just the other day they popped up to the surface, and luckily, just sheer luck, the frost seems to have stopped. But anyway, the beans are up, and they're really tiny, maybe 2 inches tall right now. And this is when the slugs come around. So I'll throw a bit of slug bait around there, because this is when in a night half or a third of the beans can just disappear. And I don't want that. But once they get a little bit taller, like maybe 6 inches, 7 inches tall, you don't need any sort of thing at all. They just seem to take care of themselves. And I don't know if the flavor of them changes, or their skin, bark, or whatever becomes tougher, or they have more oxalic acid, or whatever. Something about their chemical constituency or the texture of their skin changes, and the slugs just move on to other things and leave them alone. So again, you don't need the whatever remedy you're using, you don't need to keep doing it all season long. You just need to do it till your plants are mature enough to handle themselves. Kind of like a baby, right? And babies are extremely vulnerable, but as they get older, they get a lot tougher. And very similar sort of thing. All right, so just a little talk here, just you, me, and the flies, about planting squash and dealing with slugs. How I go about it, as someone who, I basically spend about a half an hour out here in the morning, this time of year. This is one of my busier times of the year. This time of year and the fall, when I have to pick everything. This time of year you get all these little seedlings, and you're trying to protect them and, get them high enough to move that mulch around them. And then the garden really does take care of itself, like most permaculture gardens do. But just some reflections and thoughts on how I handle the slug situation, and also about sowing, because I know there's a lot of people, especially where I live, they've been holding back and waiting to plant things like this because it's been so unbelievably cold. You're planting them now, and they're going to come up soon, and if you've got slugs, they can make things disappear pretty quick. So always plant more than one, and if you see things starting to get eaten, do something about it right away. Alright, so thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this content. If you did, please like, share, subscribe. Check out my podcast, maritimegardening.com. And until next time, get out there, get at it, have fun in your garden. Thanks for watching.